Welcome back, everyone, to the Power of Eight. And this is a wonderful way for you to share what we've been sharing in this wonderful book called The Power of Eight by Lynne McTaggart. I'll be your co-host today along with Jennifer Smith, and we're going to be sharing chapter 2 today, which is all about the first global experiments. And it's a wonderful chapter. We've got a lot to share. And we're also going to stay tuned because if you're watching us live in the chat, you have an opportunity to share as well. We'd love to hear from you about your experiences with healing modalities and even your miracle moments over this past week. So stay tuned for that. And Jennifer, you ready to get started?
I sure am.
So this very first part of this chapter is really interesting because, and I'm always looking at my notes here, because there's these chapters I find are just so dense with incredible, rich information. And for those of you who are just joining us this show, I encourage you to go back and watch our first and second episode of The Power of Eight, because we sort of offered a little bit of context. And if you're joining us today, that's wonderful too. We're so happy that you're here. And what really inspired us to co-create this together is at this time in the world, with all the things that are shifting so rapidly and so many distractions out there, it's so important to understand the power of our intentions, the power of our thoughts, and to really remember how truly creative, divinely creative we are, and to consciously direct and guide and use and tap into those hidden inner resources for such good in the world, right? And I just feel like, I know we've talked about this before, Jennifer, as we sort of, so many people are awakening to this right now. It's really an exciting time to be alive. And I feel like, really, I don't know about you, but for me, when I really feel into it, my soul really chose this lifetime with all its, ups and downs and plot twists. It's a beautiful world, and there's so many opportunities for growth, expansion, and healing. And this is a wonderful book because it balances the spirituality along with the scientific. And this chapter definitely is a sciencey chapter, right? So,
It is. And I would like to just add, you were talking about, this is a wonderful time to be here. And I think we've all chosen this time to be here because uh, there's so many things we can do with the upliftment and just the wonderful healings we see with the energies and our ability to manifest. And, I love the power of eight too, because sometimes it's a great learning tool. And sometimes we need that connection to understand it intellectually before we say, okay, hey, I believe this. I'm gonna give this a try and really test it out for ourselves. So I know that was my background. I come from a science background. My background was engineering, so I can relate to these science experiments. And so yeah, so why don't you go ahead and tell us what you thought about the experiments and what stuck out to you as they're trying to prove out why healing energies work.
well, what I really found interesting is um, that she, in the beginning, she talks about all these different experiments that were done, and again, as you're just sharing, I'm a very intuitive person. I come out of an arts and humanities background. I'm a visual arts teacher and by training, and yet I've always been interested in science. And it's like my right brain, trusts things and takes things on intuition and faith, and my left brain is like, well, I'd like some information. And one of the things that I found really, my left brain really liked about the opening of this chapter was all of the references to the experiments that had been done previously about consciousness, and the research that had shown that thoughts could change physical reality, and and affect not only electrical equipment but also other human beings as well. And then the point that kind of was interesting is how she said, but almost no experiments had been conducted on the effect of lots of people sending the same thoughts to the same target at the same time. And so I found it really reassuring to just know that to just read about all these experiments that have been done. Like, she gives a really nice succinct synopsis and how highly educated and even science backed a lot of these experiments were, because I feel like there's a lot of noise in the outer world right now, and to be frank, there's a lot of negativity, right, spinning around, and there's a lot of drama, trauma, VPR, telenovela, like, stuff floating in the ethers, and it's important for this to be just as loud, or if not louder, so that it doesn't get drowned out by all the other stuff, right? And
I think
just
it creates a space for people to make choices. Okay,
I like
and
that.
where do you want to pay attention to, and what choices do you want to make, and which way do you want to expand? Do you want to expand more towards the positivity and the upliftment of the world, or where do you want to pay your attention to and your intentions to? Because that's really how you create your life, right?
Hmm.
And so I think the more of us talking about what's available to people, and they can even go get the book and read it and understand it for themselves, it gives them more choices of what they would like to believe.
That's so true. And it's true. Like that point about focus, we keep coming back to it because it's so essential, right? It's that gap or gain, right? Are we looking at what we don't have or what we wish would be there that's somehow missing? Or are we focusing on, you know, um, where we're moving towards, where we are right now in the present moment? And just, is that a match for where, our heart is leading us? And also, it's important to take stock of what has happened before. And I feel like that's what she's doing in the beginning of the chapter. She's setting up the context for her own experiments by looking at the forerunners, like the precursor experiments, and how they laid some groundwork, and how they made wonderful strides in terms of shifting, um, awareness and offering what you're saying, that power of choice to people, right? So that if there's any, I guess, skeptical or doubting aspect of the mind that wants to say, no, that's fluffy bunny, here's, like, and I'm going to just share an example because there might be someone out there listening right now who's like, okay, let's get specific here. What's she talking about? So, um, there are a couple that stood out for me. One was the late William Browd, a psychologist and the research director of the Mind Science Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, and later the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. He conducted a large body of research showing that thoughts can affect the movement of animals and have powerful effects on the autonomic nervous system, which is the fight or flight mechanisms and states of stress of human beings. And then um, she goes on to share about how during the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, the late Dr. Elizabeth Targ devised an ingenious, highly controlled pair of studies in which some 40 remote healers across the United States were shown to improve the health and survival of terminal AIDS patients just by sending healing thoughts, even though the healers had never met or been in contact with their patients. And that is, just really, powerful. And then for people who are like, well, who are these people doing these studies, right? Um, the very first one she mentions is Dean Emeritus of the Princeton University School of Engineering, Robert Jan, and his colleague, psychologist Brenda Dunn, who ran the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Pair Research Laboratory, and had spent 30 years painstakingly amassing some of the most convincing evidence about the power of directed thoughts to affect electronic machinery. So, every time we have those moments with our computers when they're kind of like doing wonky things, you know, again, the things that seem separate from us are affected by our energy field. So I know we joke about that when, say we're in Mercury retrograde, things are going wonky, but it's because we're actually going into this opportunity to rebirth and revisit and reflect and revise, our own belief system. So, when those things happen, again, how we look at it, I'm just thinking of this practical example because a lot of people, joke now. It's become pretty mainstream about Mercury retrograde. You know, Applying this to our own lives is just, instead of saying, oh, darn, it's Mercury retrograde, my computer's not working, it's more like, oh, my computer is giving me powerful feedback. What am I focusing on? And also knowing that it's coming up for healing. So if it's no longer like something that brings you joy, peace, or love, wonderful. Let's let it go. We don't need it anymore. Did we get the learning from it? Did we get the ahas from it? Gain the insight from it? Wonderful. Let's celebrate that gain and move forward wiser with a richer lived experience and awareness. Jennifer, what stood out for you in this chapter? There's probably lots of things, right?
You mentioned the science, the scientific research. So this was done under developing a hypothesis, testing it, using controls, using statistical significance. So all from how the academia believe that scientific research should be done. What stuck out to me, I had points on what you said, but also it would be the last one that really stuck out to me. This what they talked about Dr. Gary Schwartz, and his was talking about his impeccable credentials. And I'm just reading from the book here, but he has a degree from Cornell University, a PhD from Harvard. He was a tenured professorship at Yale and directorship of the Yale Psychophysiology Center and Yale Behavioral Medicine. But he was feeling very restricted by the fusty world of East Coast academia and left it for the open spaces and open mindedness of the University of Arizona. So I love that part where he would, I think sometimes this happens in academia where they're like, wait a minute, there's more to this than just the scientific research that we can do. And I love that, we're trying to, people are trying to prove this out scientifically of how healing works, because I think that gives uh, some people some good feels about, yeah, this is real if they haven't tried it yet. And it helps us to maybe connect intellectually what it is, but we exist on multiple planes of existence. So once we understand it intellectually, and we can kind of say, okay, I understand this. Let me look into this a little bit more and try it out for myself, because that's the path I went. And whenever I was studying about this, and I related it more back to, okay, energy, spirituality, how does this really work? And related it back to all my experiences in the corporate world with electric motors and things like that. And it started to make sense in my intellectual mind, like, okay, this could be a possibility, until I just convinced myself, yeah, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to try. I'm going to experiment myself to see if this is real. So that's, I can see where people can be led down that path. And it's a wonderful path to go.
Yeah, I think it's such a common path. Like to some degree, even though like I didn't come out of a science background, if reflecting myself, I think I came through a similar, pathway of questioning and wanting to understand. I know when I was first studying Reiki, I was reading about the liquid crystals in the blood, quartz crystals in the blood, and the law of entrainment, and it was reassuring to the mind, a form, even if another part of me was like, yes, this is resonating, then there was the sort of the mind wanting to play catch up a little bit and have that reassurance that what my intuitive hits were sharing with me kind of matched. And so, yeah, I think I'm really, really glad that you described it in that way, because I feel like a lot of people listening can really identify with that, and to know that this is, you know, was your journey with it. And I would add that it was my journey too with it, to a large degree, you know.
Mhm.
So I love that you mentioned uh, Gary Schwartz, because I know when I was working on a book that I was writing years ago, that's when I literally had like a whole chapter on a right-brained approach and a left-brained approach to the chakra system, and I referenced his work because I found it so interesting. And what she talks about in this book is really kind of the cornerstone of a lot of his work, which it was based on the Russian scientist Pop, about basically the light that emanates from forms, right? That's like the light body, right? And so I'm just looking for the part here where she was talking about just his work. Yes, this is it right here. Sorry, I just wanted to find it specifically. Um, that basically, when she started doing her first experiments, working with Gary Schwartz, they she was all excited about, you know, solving world hunger and world peace and like those really dramatic things. And he's like, let's work with leaves. You know, and then we can progress to seeds. Like, let's move in small steps. And she was like, okay. It felt like, you know, from the way you're all excited and pumped up, you know, because that's the beautiful thing. You see the possibilities in all of this work, right? It's exciting, and it restores a lot of hope too, which I think is one of the reasons why I think we were both drawn to this book, if I may be so bold as to, I don't want to speak for you, but just because hope is quintessential right now, and it goes even beyond hope, and you can call it faith, whatever you call it. It's just seeing beyond what seems to be most real, and trusting that there's more than what the eye is sometimes revealing to us, right? And in terms of possibilities, right? Because we see based on our perceptions, and so what I love about scientists too is they're always looking to test those perceptions and look outside the edges of that. So um, there's a quote here where she was saying, in working together with him, for our results to achieve true statistical significance, we needed more than 30 points of comparison between the two leaves, or what scientists call data points. And I just wanted to share this little section too, because I feel like for any of those people out there who think, I want to believe this because it sounds juicy good. And at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, well, how rigorous were the experiments? You know, were they just setting up a couple of water glasses and, you know, kumbayaing, you know, that kind of thing. Like, I don't mean to, I get it, because we, when something touches our heart in a profound way and it lights us up, we have this thing called the negativity bias in our brains that can sometimes kick in. And uh, Jennifer, I'm trusting you're still there. I thought your screen
Yeah.
froze. You're still there. Okay, just checking. So that's what I like about what she's sharing here, is that I want to share this with everyone right now, because I think it's, again, building on what we've already been sharing. And it goes on to say that she goes on to say that managing that and even a rudimentary experiment like ours would nevertheless require a painstaking 50-step protocol followed by Gary's young lab technician, Mark Boccuzzi. Mark would select 2 geranium leaves, identical in size and number of light emissions, and then puncture each leaf 16 times in a 1.6 inch by 1.6 inch grid, a process that would take several hours of preparation. The plan was for Mark to place both leaves under his digital cameras, send the images to Peter, our first intention experiment webmaster, and then stand by waiting for the signal that our group intention was finished, at which point he would use the CCD camera to photograph each leaf. And she said, originally we planned to have our participants attempt to lower the light emissions, which I thought was interesting, as we had in the POP experiment. But the healthy light, this is what I thought was interesting, the healthy light of a living organism defies common sense. The lower the level of the light in the main, the healthier the organism. I began to think that our participants would naturally feel prompted to increase the light rather than decrease it. Right before the experiment, Gary and I decided to reverse the instruction in order to increase the leaf's light emissions. I wasn't thrilled about this experimental protocol. When you deliberately increase something's light, you actually are stressing it out. So essentially, our entire experiment was to be an exercise in, you know, um, you know, kind of she felt like it was injuring a living thing, even if it was just one leaf about to drop off a plant. Um, but it's really interesting how, you know, the amount of thought and attention and detail that went into these experiments, and how basically, you know, it just because, like, maybe I should have backed up a little bit about the pop experiment. I don't know if you want to add anything there. I was looking for that part earlier, and I think I jumped ahead to this part, but it's just about how there's literally this light field around organisms, and that's what Pop first discovered. I think when he was doing research for cancer, that there's this light emission that can be measured with sensitive measuring devices, and
Yeah.
that opened up a lot of possibilities, and then um, a lot of it became widely accepted actually by
I
scientists.
think science has proved out quite a bit to help people. Even Kirlian photography, that was developed from Russia also, right? That was that in the 50s when that came out? It's been a long time, but that was showing that, that we are emitting energy. You could see the energy around people, around plants, around animals, really around any living thing. So science has been able to help prove that, some of the things we're saying are indeed true. Um, I think it's going to be a while before they can prove everything out. Be great if they could, but I feel like that they are making some strides. I always feel like science is always going to lag behind spirituality and belief. Always. That's what I think. That's what I have seen. So,
Yeah.
I go through these, and I like the sciencey background. And as I'm reading the chapter, I read it last night again, and I thought, wouldn't it just be because you see how much it costs for these scientific experiments? They have to get grants for $1.8 million to do all of this research, to conduct it correctly based on science, what academia thinks is is science, significantly with statistical significance. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be easier if we just believed and tried it? Then
I
you would
was
know for yourself that it's true.
I was
Like
just
I
thinking
did.
I was just thinking the same thing, Jennifer, as you were speaking. I was like, why don't we just trust?
Yeah.
Like, why do we need all this evidence? And and this is, I'm glad you said that. Thank you for voicing that, because, and it's not to discount all of the wonderful science and data that that's in this book, and that that's out there, because like we were sharing earlier, it is reassuring to the mind. And at the same time, with so many you know um I'm going to call them challenges in the world, because they definitely present as challenges, especially in the face of still bridging, I'm going to call it a gap between who we identify as being and who we truly are, right?
Mhm.
And so when faced with um, you know a, a so-called challenge, the sort of the mindset and the thought process, because it usually for a lot of people is a thought process first. Before, sometimes it's an emotional reaction too. It can be go one or both ways, and the two are related. And also to just, but to see it also as an opportunity. And I mean, this is something that in my own journey, I mean, I have many of, like all of us, we all have many opportunities to practice. I definitely have. And recently too, I I think I shared on the call last week that I had a really intense energetic experience with a communication that went wonky and haywire. And for the first time ever, like, focusing more on learning from past experiences and really being present in the moment, I really tapped into that sense of neutrality, that sense of being able to have both compassion, like to trust that what I was feeling inside, and this is more, I'm not talking about emotion here. What I'm talking about is just sensing that the energy felt really wonky, is I guess the only way I can describe it. Like it didn't bring me joy. If anything, I could, because you were mentioning earlier too, like we're so multifaceted. We have like this multidimensional awareness. We're not just physical think bots, like, we have, it's having all of these dimensions of self online, and becoming aware of and practicing as well how to live and tap into them in these daily everyday moments. And it was like noticing that there was a part of me that was like, oh my gosh, what's going on here, and a little bit fearful, a little bit, like taken aback. And then another part of me that was um you know feeling some tension in my body, so as a physical, emotionally feeling shocked, and then the spiritual, you know, wanting to like make a meaning out of it. While I kind of just stayed neutral and noticed that. I know it sounds like, I mean, just as I'm sharing it right now, I'm sure there's someone out there going, "Oh, really? Come on! You noticed all of that in the moment while you were being hit with some really strong, intense energy and in the form of communication from another human being over the phone." And I can honestly say, yes, this is why I'm sharing it, because it's been many years of practice, many years of getting out of my own way, and that mind that just needed to understand everything, and just going beyond just the thinking my way through things and moving it into an embodied presence, awareness, sense. And noticing all those different facets of self, and then choosing to stay in that place of neutrality, which allowed me to respond from a centered, grounded place with saying, well, just something instinctually knew that if someone's coming at me like this, it's not about me, and this person is suffering and struggling. And I have compassion, not judgment for them. And I also have compassion for myself, because this is a strong energy coming at me that I wasn't expecting. And it's okay that there's little wobbles inside of me too. And I'm going to be okay. I'm going to trust that everything's going to be okay, and that this is an opportunity to grow, not an opportunity to hook into more fear or anger or hurt or something along those lines, like a lower frequency energy. And I really saw that moment as an opportunity to practice, to lived practice, not just on the meditation cushion when everything's like hunky dory, but like in the heat of the moment. And I'm so grateful that everything up until now, all the times I've backslid and,
Mhm.
kind of gotten there and then pulled the carpet out from underneath my feet in the attempt to get to that place, it was all preparing me for that now moment. And I just share that because I feel like everything in this book about the power of 8 and the power of focus and intention, that she's, especially in this chapter, that she's kind of laying that context for, is to really help us to understand that some of the most simple practices are the most profound. And I think it's our mind that overcomplicates things.
Yeah, and to explain a little bit, like whenever you're going through the energies, it's more of, we talk a lot of, I talk a lot about mindset, because that really goes into the spirituality. You'll hear people say, your divine mastery presence, really staying in that presence. And so in your situation last week, where someone had this emotional outburst, right, towards you, um, and if that has happened, I'm sure to all of us at some point, you can allow that energy, that emotional outburst that's coming towards you, it can you can let it affect you if you allow it to. But if you have a really strong mindset and you can stay in the presence, like what you were talking about, then it can have like little effect on you. So it's really how are we going to let other people affect us? Are we going to stay in our presence and not take on that energy, or So I think that's a good illustration of what people may go through. I just wanted to explain it a little bit more with different words so people could understand, what we were talking about. And also, I wanted to switch to like uh, another. And I look at this energy a little bit differently, but in the experiments, they used some different tools or symbols from Reiki.
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So they used one of the symbols, which was called the chokore, which comes from a Reiki symbol, but that's a power symbol. And they felt like whenever they did that chant and they used it, and the author didn't even realize exactly what it was at the time. I don't think that it was really powerful to get that good energy moving.
Yeah, I think she just thought they were playing relaxing music.
Mhm.
And it was a Jonathan Goldman CD from his Reiki chants. And what I love about what you just shared is that this is where it's actually a really beautiful illustration of just if she knew without being aware that she knew, right? That that was the perfect piece of music for her experiment. She didn't understand it at the time. She didn't understand what it was. And yet, look at how mm, perfectly it aligned with the intention of the experiment, which was to amplify the power of the intentions.
Mhm.
And so you can't make this stuff up. And I think those are the moments where you just have to stand back and see there's an elegance to the universe and an elegance to and smile at ourselves, just lovingly sort of, grin and smile at ourselves and say, well, it was in there all along. You knew that was the perfect music. You didn't understand it, and something guided you to choose it. And, had you tried to figure out what the perfect piece of music would be, it might have taken you longer. You know what I mean? You might have to do research on that too. And at the same time, it was just, I'll look for a piece of music that's relaxing. So also with that, there's a feeling state. It's not just a mental state, which I know been talking a lot about that too, and she talks about in her book too, because it's not enough just to think the thoughts. You actually it really is like a unification of all those aspects of self. You want to feel like you're centered and grounded in your body. You want to have a sense of awareness of the sensations in your body. You want to focus on a feeling of gratitude and appreciation, because that's a very high frequency energy. That's a whole other conversation we could talk about in another book we could read, about all the map of consciousness and David R. Hawkins and all the work he's done around, different frequencies of emotions and how they affect energy too. Um, and then the trust, the leap of faith, the trust, the surrendering, the need to know, and just being present, which is also part of the intention experiments, and the sort of the quieting the mind, the all the you know the editorializing and the questioning, and and just, yeah, just having it. It's almost like I use this analogy sometimes. I'm not in the corporate world, so I don't know why I use this analogy, but maybe you can relate to it better because you were in the corporate world, right? But it's like sitting around. I guess we've had meetings and teaching too, right? I've been on committees, but like that boardroom meeting where it's like everyone's on the same page and everyone's working together in harmony, as opposed to some people are, you know, focused on the, whatever's being discussed, and other people are distracted, and other people are just no people and other people are yes people. It's getting everything to flow and harmonize and like everyone to work together really well.
Mhm.
That's what it's
Yeah.
like inside of us, right? When she's doing these intention experiments, right?
Yeah, and I think the intention experiments is quieting the mind that helps you get that connection to source, which helps with that energy to pull through because energy comes through us and out us. That's what we're filming with Kirlian photography, with the light emissions, um, with with all these scientific things. And the quieting of the mind just allows that to for that connection to happen. And then the feeling, the gratitude and appreciation, which are really high frequency. And also, I think just really um, taking those intentions and kind of allowing it to flow through the heart area. And you just flow it out to the heart area with that intention. I was watching Gaia TV this weekend. I don't hardly ever watch TV, but I kept that subscription because there's a lot of good information on there. So people want to learn. There's all sorts of learning things there, right? All sorts of things. I was watching, and they were talking about scientific experiments there too. I think the one I was watching was about channeling, and of course, there was a lot of people from academia that went over to channeling, but they were talking about the field of the heart and how it can be measured. That field it can stand out 3 feet or more. It's just I think the equipment could only measure out 3 feet because it could be really large. And then our brain area is just like an inch around is where they could feel it. So it really shows where the true power comes from, and that's from our heart center area.
Yeah, and I think there's even it's interesting. I did a training with the Institute of Heart Math, a building personal resiliency mentorship with them, and even prior to that, I was always interested in the Institute of Heart Math. They're another great foundation. They have a lot of even short videos you can watch. I love Gaia TV too, and it just made me think of it because they talk about the heart, the electromagnetic field of the heart. I believe it's 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain, and that they talk a lot about in the program that I was training in heart brain coherence. And so really it is because if we're in a coherent state, that's what you're talking about with the channeling and the receiving
Mm-hmm.
the divine guidance and being connected to an expanded source of information in the form of energy and impressions. And that is because we've got two major systems that inform a lot of other bodily systems in harmonious conversation. It's not the head dominating one other, like the heart, or it's this cooperation, this unification of these two systems. And so it's powerful stuff, right? Like
And you can feel that. You can feel that coherence, right? Whenever
yes.
you. Mhm.
And they even have, it's interesting. I don't know. I'm just going to share this too because I feel like it just fits into like the topic so well today with the experiments. And I never thought to bring it out today because I didn't realize you're going to be talking about it. And that's okay. So I'll just describe it. There's a little clip that fits onto your ear, and then there's an app, and it actually senses like you can practice heart brain coherence. And it literally, you're focusing on you can change it, but it's like a circle, and it as you're breathing, you can do it for they recommend 9 minutes every day, and it actually gives you a readout of your heart brain coherence pattern. And so and the key is it's very basic, in terms of, and I say basic, it's like simple, it's not complex, but it's perfect. And at the same time, it's profound. It's the focusing on something you're grateful for and breathing slowly and intentionally, and just relaxing the mind. And it's amazing how it can literally measure those patterns. And I know they've used this to train EMS workers and people who work in emergency rooms and police officers to be able to respond rather than going into fight or flight in their nervous system when they're working in these types of jobs where there's a high degree of burnout and stress. And so it's really fascinating how accessible and how, you know, I want to say mainstream all of this is becoming. Like, even if some of this might be new to some of the people listening, I just felt guided to share that too, because this is a wonderful institution, and they're bringing it into, institutions and places where, people really benefit from these kinds of practices, and it's they're measurable results and improvements. And they talk about moving to new set points, right? So if you practice for a certain period of time, then over time the set point shifts, and you can be faced with the same trigger or the same circumstance or situation, like maybe say arresting someone or something like that, and be able to stay in that zone of responsiveness rather than going into fight or flight. And it has to do with your nervous system and how it responds to stressful situations. So
Wow, I didn't realize all that. But I mean, to me, that seems like it's putting people in this helping them with the response rather than the reaction. And that calm response is actually going to be much better energy for the situation than a reactive response.
exactly. And even, on a a tangent that's related, something that just popped into my mind right now, I feel guided to share with everyone during our discussion, is something that I've looked into too, because as a classroom teacher, right, working with high school students, and also I've worked with students who have safety plans, who have a history of behavioral challenges, and, you know, that there's something called neuroception, where it's when you're working, it applies really. I think, I think that the term attunement, right? When we talk about, as a Reiki master, passing an attunement
Hmm.
to someone who's gaining one of their degrees, or receiving attunement ourselves in our process of gaining our degrees, it's on a scientific level, we call it neuroception, because we have experiences that can sometimes lock our nervous system into certain types of responses, or what more likely reactions to situations, so that this is where we can't think our way out of trauma. We can have a positive way of looking at things, and at the same time it's incredibly powerful and important. And at the same time, the feeling part is really the sensation part of noticing what the signs are in our body, that our body needs extra reassurance, with the support of the mindset and with the support of, um, and so as a classroom teacher, I know I worked with one student who had a really serious safety plan and a long history of uh, difficult experiences in her life. And I instinctually would, if I went over to check on her work and ask her how she was doing, I would never stand over her. I would always kind of crouch down and be lower than her. And I would always start off with, "How are you doing today? How's your day going?" And oftentimes she'd say, "Not very well." And I'd say, "That's okay. You know, um, you know, do you want to talk about it?" And she'd say, "No." I'm like, "That's okay. You don't have to talk about it." Just letting her know that I was present and I cared, and not trying to solve or fix anything with the head, but just
Hmm.
being, kind of present, was my mindset. Just to put a So the mindset was there. The mindset was, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm open, and just let this moment guide me to, like, the next steps, right? And when we are conscious of how we're using and directing and channeling our energy in everyday situations, like, not just even, when we're doing, I mean, I say this because we're both in the healing arts, right? I just feel like I really feel guided today and inspired to, like, remind people, because I needed to remind myself of this, that because I think for many years I did think it was just for the meditation cushion, or when I'm doing a healing or receiving a healing or practicing or learning a healing art. This is like our everyday interactions with people, right? And so the
Absolutely.
neuroception is, I didn't define it very well. I apologize for that, but it's essentially, in a nutshell, as I understand it, that sense of attunement that people around us feel with each other, that's that presence, and it literally calms the nervous system down, because when people are not aware of this thing called neuroception and they're interacting with people and they're kind of in their own sort of bubble, right? Then they sometimes don't understand why people are responding to them the way that they are, because it's maybe not even about the situation. It's just something underneath the radar of in the subconscious mind that's been buried and frozen is getting triggered, and there's nothing to de-escalate that trigger on a nervous system level. It's the body's going into fight or flight, and then the head's trying to figure it all out, and then it gets soupy real fast. So,
Yeah, I think holding the space for people, just like you said, the everyday interactions with people, and I think most people can relate to that. You know, I can feel it. People who allow themselves to feel can feel people's presence and the energy, and they feel calmer, more relaxed, and before I even was able to feel like I feel now with the energy healing. I mean, there's been instances like you have a person that just feels good to be around them. If it's an aunt or a grandma, they probably have exude this good energy and just holding space for you. So I think most people can relate to things like that. So that's what it is.
yeah, and you know what just popped into my mind too is it's true because, again, I like the idea of that we're demystifying it for people a little bit. If I mean, for some people, maybe they already get this, but if it's something that, is calling you here, maybe there's a part of you that, just demystifying it, because going back to like the early experiments in the chapter about how our thoughts affect, human beings and equipment, it's, even just like you said, being around people who are sending us, goodwill, thinking positive thoughts about us. I think sometimes what happens is people can forget because our thoughts inside our head, well, nobody can hear what I'm really thinking. But they can feel it, right? They can
Oh
feel
yeah,
it.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
and that sometimes can be where we can create a lot of wonky energy too, because it's a classic scenario of someone stewing about something inside, and you can feel that something's off with a friend or a partner or a family member or a coworker, and you ask them how they're doing to show that you care and you're concerned, and also because you're fact checking your what you're picking up energetically too, and their response is, "I'm fine. Everything's okay. I'm fine." And it's basically they don't want to talk about it, but it's going on, and you just feel kind of uncomfortable around them, or you feel something's off, and it's kind of can feel very confusing, right? If also you get into that pattern of wanting to figure it out also, right? Because
Yes.
that's where I feel like all of this kind of comes full circle, right? Because, when we're not aware of how we're using our energy, or we think no one, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And the thoughts I think about, you know, anything, including other people in my life, won't affect them. It actually does. And it also affects us because it affects how we see the world. It affects how, you know, how our own nervous system, reacts to situations and makes assumptions. And then there's a ripple effect in that way. Why not flip it around? Because she was sharing in the experiments too, when people are sending a target healing, that they're actually receiving a healing themselves. And, I know that from when you're doing Reiki also.
Yeah, I would like to say that I think the what affects us the most is our own thoughts to ourselves. I think that is the number one effect on our lives. So, can other people pick up on our thoughts? Yeah, but like I don't believe that someone else's thoughts about me can do any harm to me. And maybe that's because I built my positive mindset. But my own thoughts, that's people's own thoughts to themselves, that inner dialogue, I think is so important because that's what's going to affect you the most. That's what's going to, I had to tell this story as, before I really started understanding this, and we always have more and more to learn, right? But I remember going to an event with people who were psychic, so they were very in tune with everything. So that really puts you in a different perspective, like walking into a room where everybody will be able to pick up on your thoughts. Think about, I really think more people are getting more uplifted and uplifted, and that's the point we're going to be at someday. So um, I don't know. I always think about that. Like, people can read my thoughts if they want to. I'm okay with that, you know, because you work yourself up into a mindset to just be positive. So,
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is like, I completely agree with you. Like when what I guess just to clarify what I meant about it is just like when you walk into a room and you feel something's off and someone's not clear with you, right? And I mean, you again, we can all decide what we do with that. I'm just in my own experience now, I look at it very differently. I notice I see this drama, especially because I teach high school. So and so is thinking something about me. You know what I mean? And it's if we're not you know wanting to talk about it, but we're sending people not very. That's why conversely, if you're around, like I say, a grandmother or someone like that, and you're not identifying as a healer per se, but they're just sending love, they care, there's no anger being sent or whatever, then that person just feels really good to be around. So it's not that necessarily from a psychic point of view that we're able to read every single person's thoughts. And I feel like I know what you're saying too, like the clearer and cleaner we are, it doesn't matter if someone can read our thoughts, from that point of view. And at the same time, I also trust too that someone who is, you know, an intuitive, a psychic with integrity, first of all, doesn't want to go around and read everyone's thoughts because that
me
would be
too.
invasive and that would be a boundary violation. And second of all, would ask permission first, right?
Sure.
So there's that. Actually, you just reminded me of something funny. I walked into one of the classrooms one day. I think it was a drama classroom. And this was interesting. This was like a little micro experiment that I was not expecting. I had an on-call. And after that, the drama teacher asked me if I would pop into his classroom for a moment. And on the way over to the classroom, he said, pick a famous person or a movie or something like that. And I forget what I picked, but I picked something. And I'm like, why? And he's like, you'll see. And then I don't understand it. I just know that it worked. Then I see, this is kind of where I'm at now. It's like, I don't understand why it worked, but hey, cool, it worked. That's all I need to know. And so he didn't give me choices. It was completely random sampled. I just came up with it. It was like a movie or a TV show. I can't remember. And I thought about it, and I didn't even tell him what it. No, I did. No, I didn't even tell him what it was. And then he did something like snapped his fingers a few times and clapped. It was like an unusual combination of things. And then together he asked the students, "What's she thinking?" And in unison, they all said the name of the show I was thinking. And he said, "That's telepathy 101." And I was like, "Oh, interesting. Cool." So the world is the new earth is here.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
than we maybe sometimes realize. Like people are really awakening at an interesting rate in places where you might least expect.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's exciting for me. I love it. I love it. So we are already 55 minutes in.
Oh my goodness, we should wrap this up. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And it's always a blessing and an honor to share this time together with you, Jennifer, and with everyone else who's either, caught this live or on the replay. And, I was checking the messages. I should have maybe asked people directly, if you had any comments. I didn't. We were so wrapped up in the conversation, which was so much fun. And because I know last week we had a few comments, so please stay tuned for next Wednesday at the same time, same channel, same channels, where we're going to be moving on to chapter 3, which is really exciting, virtual entanglement. And I feel like we actually created a little bit of a segue for that too. Everything we we're just talking about with telepathy and, sensing other people's thoughts and how we're all, not separate. We're very much interconnected. So stay tuned for that. I hope you'll join us for that episode. And, we would love to hear from you, what you're receiving from these, or, just your comments, your questions, your thoughts. And thank you for joining us. And we look forward to being with you next week. Lots of love and light. Be well.